All right, I am live. Hello, everybody. I'm going to apologize in advance as there are a few changes today. So first, there is no Jonah. I've actually shipped Jonah to another part of the country along with our new team member, Jordan, and they'll be recording some stuff for certain conferences and things. So we'll have some upcoming content for that. So it will just be me today live streaming. Definitely also in a new environment. Internet's a little funky, so gonna do my best here today. We still have all of your questions, and as always, we are going to go ahead and pivot over to the forum and the patrons first. And then if you have any more questions along the way, please leave them in the live chat, and I'll get back to the live chat as much as I can once I go through the forum questions. So let me go ahead and open OBS here. OBS has been really bad on my system lately, and it is buggy, and now it's not loading, and it's not letting me switch scenes, which is really unfortunate, actually. So let me go ahead here. Hey, everyone in the live chat, let me know if I sound okay. But OBS is really being a pain in the butt right now. It's not letting me switch scenes. So I'm going to go ahead and actually start with the first question. I'll hopefully be able to switch to show you the question in a second here. OBS isn't even opening, even though it's running in the background. So it's being difficult. But the first question on our forum is from Ente, which is, what privacy concerns are there when giving Android apps access to my files? For example, so I can send images on Discord. I'm considering switching to Obsidian for Notes, which stores markdown files locally. I'm concerned about the privacy of those files on my phone. I'm using Android 14, not signed into Google or Samsung accounts. So this is fortunately, so to summarize that question, what they're asking is, what are the privacy concerns in giving a specific Android app access to your files or your photos or something like that? Fortunately, both iOS and Android at the time of recording this are pretty granular. So you can say, I want to grant this one photo or this one file, and you don't have to give generally your entire photo library to an application. And the privacy concern is actually pretty straightforward. As far as I know, there isn't anything beyond what you might expect, which is essentially that app can now access your data. So if it's a trusted app, something like Signal, I tend to just give it access to my entire photo library. It's an open source app. I have no reason to think that they're going to be looking through all my photos or doing anything with all of the rest of the photos that it has access to. But if it's a more invasive application, then I will be a little bit more rigorous with what I'm going to allow it to access. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to try to figure out OBS because it's still not opening. I'm sorry, everyone. Here, oh, it opened. No way. Okay. There we go. So that was the first question from Ente. Sorry, I'm all over the place, everybody, but hopefully now that it's on the correct screen, I can go ahead and resume and you all can see it normally. Let me make sure. Yep. So that was the first question up there from Ente that I just addressed. Again, just be a little bit granular with apps that you actually want to be granular with. Otherwise, it's probably fine with more trusted applications. Unknown Ghost is a regular, so thank you for being a regular. And they asked, what would you consider the hardest part of Linux for beginners, assuming they're using a Mint-like distro with good Wayland support? I'd say there's two friction points, right? So there's two big things that come to mind on my end for Linux that I think do hold it back. And the first one is very early in the journey, which is getting it installed. I think a lot of people have never actually reinstalled an operating system on their computer, let alone replace it with a different one. And I think that the process can be a little bit overwhelming for someone who's not very tech literate. And I think that's valid. I mean, most people I know have never replaced an operating system on anything. So I could definitely see that. And also some Linux distros have certain compatibility things with certain pieces of hardware that I just can't expect a regular person to know and understand. But let's say someone gets it installed and everything's taken care of and they got through that first hurdle. I think the second hurdle, and I know you say beginners, and I take that as you're a beginner to Linux, but not a beginner to having a professional life. And I think a lot of people are actually dependent on some tools that they might not find on Linux, or they might not be happy with the alternatives on Linux, particularly things like AutoCAD or the Adobe suite or any other professional tools. that even beginners might be dependent on. Now, that's not everybody. And again, a lot of people, this is resolved because they don't use professional tools and they can just buy a Linux computer that's pre-installed out of the box. So I think there's always a way for people to use Linux, but I do think those are probably the two hardest parts of Linux for not just beginners, but for a lot of people. I think even advanced Linux users actually get a little bit worked up over some of the lack of professional tools accessible to them on Linux. And a lot of them still dual boot or have multiple machines, or they have to use something like Wine and emulate, or they're going to do GPU pass-through or something, which I wouldn't expect a beginner to have to do. So those are kind of my loose thoughts, but I think everybody's going to have something that's going to make any operating system a bit of a transition for them. And I don't think Linux is immune to that. I think anyone transitioning from Windows to Mac OS is going to find things that are tricky and vice versa. And I think there's always going to be hurdles when you're moving to a whole new operating system. So those are my takes. But if anyone has other ones, definitely leave them in the live stream comments, which, by the way, I see your comments, so I'm glad I sound okay and I sound like a princess. Thank you, Alexander MSGP. I'll take it as a compliment. Next comment. Let me take a little tea break. All right. Next comment from Anonymous1, who's another regular, so thank you for being active on the forum. They have two larger questions for me. One, they've really enjoyed the interviews that I've done with several people in the space. They're curious if I have more plans for collaborations with individual creators, not just companies, in the future. Are there any upcoming interviews with creators from other tech or privacy communities like the Linux Experiment? Such collaborations would be fantastic. Yeah, so first off, I've collaborated with pretty much most people I've wanted to collaborate with so far. I mean, Chris Titus Tech, Kerry Parker, like you said, Don't Stop Dragons, Seth for Privacy from Opt Out. And those are all people that I respect, and I have other people I respect. I really like the Linux Experiment, and we actually have had some behind the scenes communication, but you know, we're both busy and all creators are busy, and it's actually pretty hard to like coordinate things and get things going and finding an idea that's organic, because there's probably a million different things that you can do and a lot of them feel forced when it's between two creators. So it's the kind of thing where I actually think that people maybe don't give enough credit to how much effort went into like getting those previous collaborations in order. And it also, it's the kind of thing where I don't have anyone to like reach out on behalf of me. I have to coordinate those myself. So it's kind of this tricky thing. But long story short, yes, like I want to do more things. I like the collaborations. I think it's good to show that like a lot of people in the space do overall get along, even if we treat things differently or we see things differently. So I do like the collaborations, but they're hard to do. And I don't know if you saw the All Things Secured one. I was recently on his, I think it's a live stream podcast type of deal. So that was another one I recently did. So we do our best, but it's hard. And then the second question is, have either of you attended events like DEFCON? Do you have plans to attend or participate in the future? Yeah, I mean, just to speak especially to DEFCON, I have issues with the pricing for DEFCON, and I feel like the value you get, it just seems very crowded. I feel like it's become very popular, and for the record, I've never attended DEFCON, so for people who've gone, definitely feel free to correct anything I'm saying. But I just feel like it's really crowded. I'm not a fan of Las Vegas in general, and it seems really expensive. And honestly, with how big and just everywhere, everything all at once it all is, it's just hard to justify going right now, with the exception of maybe meeting some people that we talk to behind the scenes, which is valuable. So that might be the only reason we ever go. But actually, I sent off my two other team members on a trip right now. So they're going somewhere else, but not in DEFCON. As Jonas says, Henry shipped me far, far away. And we'll have content coming out soon for that. So yeah, in the past, we've mostly gone to Monero conferences as a team, and they were all really fun. So yeah, someone said I'm the king of penguins in the live stream chat. Thank you. All right, moving on to Simple Tech. I feel so awkward without Jonah here. I got really used to live streaming with Jonah to be able to talk through things with. So I'm just going to do my best here to talk with all of you. I don't know if any of you have ever live streamed, but it's really weird because you're just talking to yourself for like an hour. And it's kind of just supposed to be normal, but it's not normal. So yeah. And let's see, next question is from Simple Tech. Love the live streams. Thank you for continuing to host them. I have two questions. When privacy experts talk about not using autofill for passwords, does that include the extension from a password manager, or are they just saying not saving the password in the browser? If you have to install a non-privacy friendly app, okay, we'll start with the first question. Normally when I see people talk about not using autofill for passwords, it normally is in the context of using your browser's native autofill and not using extensions. Now, I have seen people also say to avoid extensions because sometimes an extension can have a vulnerability, or sometimes the extensions can be used to fingerprint you, etc., etc. So I think if you're someone who wants to be best, maybe best practice is, yes, having your own dedicated password manager app that's completely separate from your browser, has nothing to do with it, and you have to manually copy and paste every time. Then from there, maybe having the extension is your next best bet. And then the next thing is probably keeping it all inside your browser. Ultimately, yes, I'm also going to discourage using autofill for your passwords in your browser. But at the end of the day, if your option is reusing the same password on every site or allowing your browser to generate and save your passwords, I'm going to have people generate and save their passwords in their browser. But of course, there's a better to best kind of spectrum here. And personally, I'm using an extension in my browser at the moment, which I find to be a very good middle ground of security and convenience. And I trust the extension that I'm using, which is currently Proton Pass. And I recorded a video like last week about Proton Pass because I've been using KeyPass for a long time, and kind of sharing my thoughts about why I'm pretty impressed with Proton Pass. And it's just been hard to get that edited. So hopefully I'll get that out ASAP so you all can get access to that, because it's an interesting video. It's one of the few Proton products where I feel like they've actually been making fast progress on it, and I'm pretty impressed. So yeah, hopefully that wasn't too rambly of an answer to your first question. Your second question, if you have to install a non-privacy friendly app on a de-Googled phone because you can't find a good alternative, what considerations should you have, and how do you minimize risks of your data? So yeah, well, the first thing, you should really take advantage of profiles or user accounts on Android. I think profiles are a little bit cleaner and easier to use for most people because it's all in the same user account. But I'll start with user accounts. So kind of like on your computer, you can set up multiple user accounts on Android, and these are completely separate. They actually use their own encryption key for different user accounts and stuff like this. So it's very well separated. So you could have a more privacy invasive user account that's away from your other stuff. The only issue is you're going to have almost like two different notification screens. When you're logged into one user account, you won't get notifications for the other one, and it's a lot to manage. It's a little frustrating, personally. I didn't like it that much. But work profiles were really solid on Android, and essentially you swipe down into your app drawer and you move over, and then you have your work apps, and you can set that up with something like Shelter, or some ROMs natively support that out of the box. So it's pretty cool. And that allows you to get notifications from both profiles in the same place on the same user account, and it's really well designed. And it also still compartmentalizes things. It even lets you use a different VPN slot within the work profile, so you can even have a different IP address. And the cool thing is, for example, if you're using iVPN has a hardcore mode, which blocks all big tech. But it's pretty restrictive, so maybe you don't use that on your main profile, but then you set up iVPN with a second VPN slot in that work profile that has a different filter list enabled to stop different things. So you have a lot more control with that kind of configuration, and that's what I'd recommend looking into. It's a really nice way to compartmentalize privacy-friendly versus non-privacy-friendly applications on Android, especially if you have access to custom ROMs. All right, let me check the live chat. All right, I see all your comments on the live chat. And again, we're going through the forum questions first, but I am just keeping a tab on this here. Hello to Prometheolus. I hope I said that. You sound fine, says Rectic. I'm glad I sound fine. Sounds and looks perfect. I still sound like a princess. Thank you. And then we have some questions, and hopefully I'll get to those questions by the end of the live stream. But I'm going to go ahead and continue through the forum. Again, you can join our forum at discuss.techlore.tech. You can keep up with a lot of good news, and it's probably one of the best ways to keep up with like digital rights stuff going on right now. You can also follow everything via RSS. You don't need an account. Everything's open source, and it's self-hosted by ourselves. So it's really good stuff. Next question is from Mohammed. Hello, Mr. Henry. I have 3 questions this fine night, and I'm really happy to see you read and enjoying your delightful working environments. Yeah, you can say that. First, are Motorola great alternatives for Google Pixel devices since they support Lineage, Calyx, and Divest? Um, that's a hard question to answer. I'd say, you have to see what these ROMs offer, you have to see what these phones offer, and then see if they're a good fit for you. What people don't talk about is Google Pixels. I think this is getting better. I think Google's expanding, but Google doesn't even sell their Pixels in every country. And so people kind of need Pixel alternatives in countries where they can't get their hands on one. I've actually seen people unironically suggest in custom ROM communities because someone said, oh, I can't get a Pixel. And they said, well, just fly into a country and buy one. Unironically, a suggestion someone made is to fly to buy a phone in another country, which is crazy. So I'm not going to be super particular about what recommendations I give people. I think if you know what you're doing, you have a reason to pick a ROM and a reason to pick a phone, go for it. Personally, one of the reasons I just really am struggling to get behind Pixels right now is actually for something really silly, and it's the screen size. But that's not something that any phone is solving right now. So I'm really frustrated by just the large screens right now on phones. Your second question, can I use the Steam Deck and other PC gaming handhelds in a more privacy-respecting way? I wish JohnnyO was here for this because I think JohnnyO has a Steam Deck. And I believe the Steam Deck's actually based on Linux. And that's about all I know because I'm not a big gamer. But all I'm going to say is, it's not much different in regards to like your network. So you can set up kind of like network firewalls. You can probably go into these handhelds and turn off some data collection. Obviously, if there's any accounts tied to those, you can use alias information. So you always have the basics that apply to other areas. And of course, you're going to have things like 2FA. And then from there, again, I'm not a gamer. I don't know how these work, but I don't see how it's any different than if someone asked me, how do I keep my studies or my school private when we have to use privacy invasive software for my school? It's compartmentalization, right? So you can have your entire gaming life on this handheld. It's separate from your other devices. If you have a PC gaming desktop or something like that, you can try dual booting. You can have different user accounts. The goal is, if there is something privacy invasive in your life, compartmentalize it to that part of your life so it's not just everywhere within your life. So in the context of school, a lot of times it's getting a dedicated school device or having a dedicated school user account or a dedicated browser. There's different extents of compartmentalization you can implement, but just having that on the back of your mind is really important. And I don't see why gaming is any different. I'm going to choose to ignore this third question because I feel like that can get dicey pretty quickly for anyone who wants to read that and see why I'm not going to handle that one. So Salmonfish says, I heard about Evercookies a long time ago, long before I became a privacy enthusiast, and I don't know if they're still a thing. Do Evercookies or supercookies still pose a threat to privacy? If that's the case, how can I avoid them? So I haven't actually dug too much into either of these concepts for a while now. Back in the day, the big, easy to point at example of these would be something like Verizon. Verizon would essentially tie a unique identifier to each of their phones. That meant that they could profile that individual device via what they'd consider these ever/super cookies. For those who've never heard these terms, essentially these super cookies are essentially ways to track an individual in essentially a permanent way that they can't really do anything about. And there's not really any core advice to give if these are a concern to you based on what I currently know, because it really depends on the implementation, right? So in the Verizon example, you could, in theory, opt out via like their privacy opt-outs, but it's debatable how effective that really is and what they actually prevent in terms of data collection. But the better solution is you have to stop using Verizon, and or you just have to understand that that's a restriction with Verizon. And so anything that's privacy and anything that needs privacy, you're not going to do on that phone or through that network in a way that Verizon can easily track. So that's about the best I can offer, because the whole point of ever/super cookies is that they are semi-permanent, and there's not much you can do about them outside of acknowledging that they're a thing, and you have to work around those limitations. But again, this is based on information that I was reading about quite a while ago. I feel like they're a term that hasn't been brought up in a long time, and so I don't really have much updated knowledge or information about this. So I need to look more into it as well. And if I find anything good, and I'll try to update this question on the forum, because that's pretty much all I got right now. And for those wondering, both Jonah and I, we normally don't really look through these questions much before we record. So a lot of our questions are pretty on the spot. So if you all are asking something like this really is about what I know, and we don't like do more information beforehand, and it's a way to more organically answer the questions. So that's kind of the limitation of this, is when we don't have like a perfect answer for something. So I apologize. Let's see. It's Promethylose is what someone said. Yeah, so someone here says that super cookies are not a thing anymore. TSL defeated them. That sounds believable to me, but I, again, have not looked into it since, so I need to be looking more into that. So that's something I need to research more. Next question is from Internet Ghost, who's been a trailblazer / regular / just a very active person for a long time. So very appreciated. And they have a really good question. This one I did see beforehand, and I did get some time to process. Here, let me see if I can adjust this a little bit here. This is a little infuriating. Or should I? I'm not going to risk even doing anything in OBS. Let's see. You all said it looked perfect, but I think that black bar is a little bit unacceptable. Let's see. Okay, we're going to live with that. Okay, Internet Ghost says, if you had to choose between the two options for a conversation, would you use SMS or WhatsApp? I ask because I think this is basically the most privacy conscious. I think they're saying that for a lot of people who are privacy conscious, this will come down to their options for people who don't use Signal. So from there, I think, okay, the scenario here, I'm going to repaint this. I use Signal as my main messenger. It could be any other nice end-to-end encrypted messenger that you all use. Let's say a family member doesn't want to use it, and then I'm now left with the choice of SMS or WhatsApp. What do I choose? I personally don't have a WhatsApp account. Now, keep in mind, I'm in the US. The WhatsApp isn't as popular in the US, and I actually use a VoIP number for my SMS. And so actually for me, the three options I have is Signal, iMessage, and an SMS. And of course, iMessage has the core limitation of only being compatible with my Apple devices / other people's Apple devices, which is an annoying, frustrating limitation, because it's actually not a terrible messenger if it was compatible on all platforms. And I would say it's better than WhatsApp, better than SMS, but nowhere near as good as Signal. So I think that if I was in a country where A, iMessage wasn't as popular, and B, WhatsApp was the main default, I would probably say that WhatsApp would probably be the next thing. And I would probably still do the same workflow I have right now. So I kind of say both, because at least in the US, a lot of people use iMessage and a lot of people don't use iMessage. And that's dependent on whether or not you have an iPhone. And so for me, it's let's use Signal. If they say no, oh, do you have an iPhone? Then great, I have an iMessage account that's tied to an email, which is really cool, by the way. I don't know if people know that about iMessage, but you can pretty much make your email, and you can add emails to your iMessage account so that people just reach out to different emails. And I have different emails set up for different use cases. So there could be one for work, one for personal, one for friends, one for family. And you can have different emails in your iCloud account, and people can reach out to any of them, and they all end up in your single iMessage experience. I see someone sending hearts. Thank you. I guess you really like what I'm saying. It's awesome. But from there, if they say, no, I don't use an iPhone, I have an Android device, then great. I have a VoIP account that I can use to message anyone, and it's unlimited, and it's fantastic. So that's my approach to it. It's like best end-to-end encryption, next best end-to-end encryption. And then if they don't have that, then SMS. And this applies outside of the US as well, but it's really just, you're debating over nitpicky things, because WhatsApp still has a lot of issues. I'm not going to say that WhatsApp is a great option, but WhatsApp or SMS is also a really bad option too. And at least one of them has basic end-to-end encryption. So that's my take, but I don't think there's a right answer here, and everyone's going to probably disagree a little bit on what they would do. And the second question is, have you heard any updates on Fossify, which is a fork from Simple Mobile Tools? For those who didn't hear, Simple Mobile Tools was bought out by a larger company, probably going to be kind of nonsense, kind of going down the same rabbit hole as probably Rivo just went down. So Fossify is a fork of it, and I haven't heard any updates. So I haven't been keeping up with it, for the record, nor have I heard any updates. So anything that you've heard in the public space is all I would hear as well. So unfortunately, I don't have any like massive insider info there. And then let's see, Steve 1 has a question here. I have heard that when interacting with financial institutions' websites using 2FA, in cases where they only have 2FA implemented via cell numbers, it was best to use an actual cell number rather than a VoIP number. I'm interested in Henry's take on this and whether using a VoIP number with my online bank is advisable or not. So this is always a tough situation because there is no best case scenario, because the court issue is that the institution only has SMS 2FA, which is now considered in many ways not as secure as more modern alternatives. So I would say that the core issue here is the bank. And I think that you're already set up in a bad situation. There is no best case scenario from here. With that said, you can minimize damage. And personally, I fall into the camp of always using VoIP when I can, mainly because my so I have multiple VoIP accounts. One of them is a Google Voice account that's used just for this situation. And the reason why I've really liked this is because Google Voice accounts that you use for VoIP are now behind Google security. There is, as far as I know, no SIM swapping capabilities in Google Voice. If someone was going to access this SMS 2FA code, they're now going to have to break my Google account that has advanced protection on it, as well as 2 YubiKeys that are required to bypass. And I just don't reasonably see how anyone's going to do that. And I feel like that is a much harder ask for someone to break than if you have T-Mobile and someone pays $10 for some employee on Telegram to essentially SIM swap you. And again, I think T-Mobile and all these cell carriers are getting better about this issue, but I still am hearing about SIM swaps. They still are a major issue, and it's something that these cell companies have not figured out yet. So I think it depends what your threat is. If your threat is a SIM swap, then I think in almost every situation, VoIP is going to be better. And that's really the core issue I see with SMS 2FA is actually SIM swap attacks. So I personally fall into camp of using VoIP when I can, assuming your bank will accept it, which is a big if. Fortunately, my bank doesn't even use this, and I am able to use TOTP with my bank, which is really awesome. But I would like to see what the take is, because you say, I'm interested in Henry's take on people who say to use an actual cell number. I'd be curious why they argue that that's more secure, because I haven't heard that argument before. And the only thing I've heard as a reason to use your actual cell number is mainly because if you lose access to your VoIP number, or if your bank locks you out of your account, or just not using your proper phone number, it can cause issues with your bank. Those are kind of more of the reasons I've heard for using an actual phone number for a bank. But if anyone has more of those arguments, I would definitely love to hear them. Let's see, gonna quickly check on the live stream comments. Let's see. Amazon amazes me that a lot of 2FA still use text, extremely unsafe. Yeah, I guess it's better than, well, it depends. There are some situations where SMS 2FA can actually be like the reason an account gets broken into, but generally it does still improve security. It's better than none in many situations, but yeah, it's definitely pretty bad when something like a financial institution is still opting for SMS 2FA. I agree. Corsa said, Henry, I wish I had your teeth. They look pristine. Thank you. Yeah. I would say that like normally in videos, you can change white balance to make, teeth or whatever you want to look a certain way. But in a live stream, you can't do that. So yeah, I'm glad that they're white. I was really just plastering my teeth with like white stuff beforehand. What would it be? Like glue. Like I just have glue on my teeth right now. Okay. Next question is from Internet Ghost again, who's again a regular. Sneaking in another question. Have you considered expanding topics you cover on Techlore to try to reach a wider audience? Yeah, and I definitely think this is something that I'm leaning more towards. You know, it's nice to get a change up. It's nice to switch things up. It does get tiring talking about the same exact topics all the time, because I don't know. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and so talking about privacy and security is really fun still, and I'm really passionate about it. But when you're talking about the same things over and over, it can get a little dull. Pause. And I guess besides just myself, Internet Ghost touches on something that we've kind of noticed back here with reaching wider audiences. So one really interesting side effect of the Techlore Clips channel, which is the channel where we clip different types of content and we publish it as unique, like short videos essentially. So in this live stream, many of these questions I'm answering are going to end up on the Techlore Clips channel. So what we've noticed on Techlore Clips is when we brand videos as privacy and security videos. So for example, like this messenger is unprivate XYZ. It just doesn't perform as well as this messenger did what? And what I'm trying to say here is when we brand these videos towards a wider demographic and we don't brand it around privacy and security, they almost across the board perform better than when we brand them as privacy and security related. Which makes sense because a lot of people don't care about privacy and security. They're not on YouTube to watch privacy and security content specifically. And so that's what we've noticed on Techlore Clips. Is that when we brand things towards a wider audience and then we maybe throw in some privacy into the concept, then it performs better. And so we're slowly trying to tinker with like integrating that into the main Techlore channel. We've been playing with that now in surveillance support, and it's actually been very successful for us. If anyone's been watching surveillance support the last couple months and you pay attention to some of the branding, unless it's a really big name in the privacy space, we're trying to avoid privacy and security branding. And we're trying to reach wider demographics to pretty much try to bring privacy to more people, because at the end of the day, if you only brand the privacy, you're only branding to people who are either searching for privacy or are already involved with privacy. And we're hoping to kind of expand beyond that. And that's kind of what we've been noticing back here. So yeah, you're pretty much touching on something that we've been playing with the last 6 months or so. And it's really been good. And someone says, you have to clickbait. We get it. And it's not even clickbait. It's, like there's ways to clickbait what I'm speaking to for sure. But even without clickbait, it's actually how we market things. And so every Techlore video, just to speak to this, I try to have the title and thumbnail picked out before I even start scripting a video, let alone pick up a camera. And when you pick a title and thumbnail, you're essentially also picking your target demographic. So a good example of this is the Proton Pass video. So I can choose to brand a Proton Pass video as, you know, Proton Pass is awesome, XYZ. And that's great. But that means that someone has to actively be looking for Proton Pass. And that pretty much really limits what your target demographic can be versus here's why this is my favorite password manager. Means that now anyone who's looking for a password manager is the target demographic. So that's an example of how it's not even necessarily clickbait, it's just choosing how we market something and what the video is even about. And this is why this is my favorite password manager, because I picked the title and thumbnail before I script, is actually going to be a different video. So like it's just a different video altogether. And it's pretty much more of these broader, wider audience videos that we might try to lean more into. Not all the time, because I still think it's good to have specific content for like the specific privacy and security community. But when you try to branch out, you actually do see a lot of people like start discovering privacy and then find your other content. So just a little bit of the nuance there, because you can actually clickbait either of those things. And I think that like a lot of people will do that. And there definitely is a fine line between clickbait and like attention bait, whatever you want to call it. But that exists in both of those spectrums. And I think this is a slightly different thing, which is just target demographics and like what you're choosing to market, essentially. I think I beat that one really heavily there. So I'm going to move on to the Ralph question. Ralph18, who's a regular, which is awesome. I feel like every month we see more and more regulars. So I'm excited about that because I really like the forum. You all should join the forum, discuss.techlore.tech. Someone So Ralph said, with the recent announcement of Microsoft recall and the huge privacy implications, there's a lot of people considering switching to Linux or at least Mac OS. What can these users do to tackle the lack of app support? For example, the Visual Studio IDE. Also, are there any privacy risks to a Linux distro and the activity done on it from Windows dual boot? So, yeah, I spoke to this earlier, actually, which is one of the friction points of Linux is availability of professional software. And I do think that this is a legitimate concern for people. If you're someone whose livelihood and your full-time job depends on Visual Studio IDE, then it's very unfair, I think, to demand that they move away from their operating system of choice and the workflow they're probably dependent on. It's asking a lot from someone. And I don't think that they should do it, but I think it's just asking a lot. So I think that, as always, what I'm going to come back to is, how do you tackle the lack of app support? Are you able to compartmentalize? Because generally, in the context of something being needed for professional purposes, that's something that can be reserved on a work device. So, you should have your own work device or your own work operating system, or if you're dual booting, you can have Windows with Visual Studio IDE in one operating system. And then you also have, Linux or whatever you want to use in the other one. So again, you really have to think about how you can compartmentalize things, because that's really the easiest way to try to separate things in your life and still benefit from privacy invasive software when you can. Because a lot of times there are valid reasons to be on Windows or Mac OS or Linux, and there's benefits to it that have nothing to do with privacy or security, but maybe it's convenience, maybe it's integration with your team, maybe it's what your school requires. There's just so many reasons. And so what I would do is try to use Linux for things that you can use Linux on, and maybe you'll discover there's actually an alternative to Visual Studio down the road, and you can actually full-on move to Linux. But when I first started using Linux, I didn't just 24/7 move everything over. I started by just using it for some of my personal stuff. Then I realized, oh wait, I can just move this over as well into my Linux distro. And over time, I realized, well, I don't even need this other operating system anymore. I can just do Linux. So that's what I would say. Compartmentalize, see what you can transition over time, and that's about it. I think that it's nice to see people look at recall and go, wait, I don't want this. We actually had a really big thread on our forum about this, where someone posted saying, I'm officially leaving Windows after seeing this, and a lot of people were giving thumbs up, which is really awesome. So, and then you also ask, on a topic of dual booting, can Windows compromise the privacy of a Linux distro if it's dual booted with secure boot enabled and both OSs being on different SSDs? And I would say, especially if you have full disk encryption on both of those, the answer to that is, as far as I know, I haven't seen any reason to say there is any privacy concern. So if you have secure boot, if you're full disk encryption on both drives, especially on the Linux drive, I really don't see what the concern is, and you're still going to get a huge amount of benefit. So I really have no reason to discourage that workflow. The only reason I would ever discourage dual booting is it can be really messy. And a lot of that comes from dual booting on the same drive, though. So if you have different drives and it's done cleanly, it's done safely, I actually really like dual booting, because then you can do everything on one piece of hardware. So, yeah. Next question. Let's see. It would be nice to have a section from time to time to share some of these stories for Techlore clips. Okay. I don't think there's a question here. Check on the live chat real quick. What about KVM on Linux with Windows for programs? Yeah, so this is another workflow. So some people, I mentioned this earlier when I talked about different workflows. You can use KVM, virtual machines, or you can use something like GPU pass-through. So you can have Linux and then pass through a GPU onto a Windows VM. I've done this before. Alexander, MSGP, currently does this. It was a cool workflow, because it meant that you just boot into Linux, and Linux is your host operating system for everything. And that was cool. What wasn't cool was the random breakage. There was still a performance loss in the Windows operating system. Keep in mind, I was trying to video edit in this Windows guest, and I got pretty far. I was able to actually edit quite a few things, and it didn't work very badly, and you have pretty much full GPU performance. It's the CPU that took a little bit of a hit. And I'm sure it's gotten better since I did this 5 years ago. But it was really messy, it's really cluttered, and I just can't imagine many professionals wanting to deal with the instability of something like a KVM with GPU pass-through configuration. So I'm not saying don't try it and that it won't work for some people, but it definitely didn't work for me. And it's not something I'd recommend for someone who's really dependent on something for a full-time job. I personally would suggest to that person, if they have the funds or if they're working for a company, get a dedicated work device and just have Linux and just enjoy Linux. And then use, all your privacy invasive software for your work device. That's what I would recommend. But again, that KVM thing is an option too. Maybe for some of you, it's going to connect with you better than it did for me. This also isn't really a question. So move on to the next one. I was wondering if sharing my Mullvad account with a friend would have any privacy security implications. I want to get him to try the service. Not really, especially with a service like Mullvad. I would say the only thing to be concerned about is if you're sharing an account with someone, now you're liable for, anything they do on your account. So if your friend was doing something illegal and they tried to figure out who's behind the account, you'd probably be the person behind the account, assuming they could eventually get your information and Mullvad handed over subscriber information, etc. That's the only concern off the top of my head. And it's one of the reasons why in the past we've been really careful about when we tried projects like the VPN speed team and stuff like that. We had to be a little bit careful about like who we were granting access to the VPN credentials, because theoretically if someone was doing something illegal and it was on our account, we could be held liable for that. So outside that, not a huge deal. Let's see. Corsa. Oh, Corsa's a regular, and they were also active, I believe, in the live chat. So really glad to see you active all across the board. So they say, Henry, I hope you're doing great. I hope you're doing great too. And they said, do you know of a great FOSS gym/workout tracker app or website? I'm going to start with that one. Outside of what you might find on F-Droid, if you just type in activity tracker or workout tracker, I think there's a few on F-Droid. Some of them looked okay, but I don't have a specific one I can just shoot off the top of my head to give you. The main thing that I'm concerned about with a gym/workout tracker app is where the data ends up. And I think this is where people need to understand what benefit free and open source is going to give them. Because theoretically, let's just say that you have an open source gym workout tracker app, but then it's uploading all your data to Strava. What are you really accomplishing by using a free and open source application? So if you're using, for example, let's say there wasn't something that was open source, but it was completely offline. I think that the offline but proprietary app is going to be a better privacy-friendly approach than a FOSS app that only uploads your data to Strava. I know these are extreme examples. They're not really realistic, but I just want you to think about that for a second. I personally would be looking more at where the data ends up, how you transfer data, how do you store data privately. After a lot of digging, one of my issues with Garmin in general is that Garmin pretty much always stores your data. So even if Garmin is more privacy respecting, blah, 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 Garmin always is going to have pretty much a record of everywhere you walk, run, do everything, which isn't pleasant. I've been recently experimenting with a like iCloud based. I'm assuming you can probably do it with Google Drive and whatnot. So you can probably try doing this. So the reason why iCloud is because you can set it up with ADP, which is end-to-end encrypted. And also it's an app that doesn't have any servers. So I've been experimenting with this recently. So essentially the way it works is the app itself doesn't have any internet. You can turn off internet for the app, and essentially it hooks up with iCloud for syncing. And so you pretty much get to host essentially your own library of workouts. And that seems like a really good middle ground for me. And you can also use it with any fitness tracker. It syncs to any fitness tracker, and you can set it up with anything that you want. So that's something I've been playing with. But so far, I haven't found anything that's super easy to recommend where I can just go, yeah, here's a workflow that you can use to privately track all your metrics, all your activities. It's going to keep data locally / keep data end-to-end encrypted, zero knowledge somewhere, or it's just a very privacy-friendly company. It's a really messy situation right now. And so I'm still playing with it. If you find anything good, let me know. But that's kind of where my journey's been headed, is more towards like, it's kind of like how you would handle a KeyPass database if you were going to cloud sync it, which is you find like a cloud provider that works for you, and then you have this database that you sync through your own cloud. And that way, like, it's kind of your data in some ways. And then I'm trying to replicate that with these like fitness activities. Work in progress. WIP. Next one, I've been using a parcel locker to receive items I order, which is good since it doesn't expose my real address. However, the parcel website also prompts me to enter my billing address for whatever reason. Is it viable to enter a fake address there? I want to be careful with advice I give here because I don't know what kind of legal requirements there are for this address. I don't know if this billing address is something that is strictly for billing. So if you're using privacy.com, it can be any billing address. It doesn't matter. Or if this is actually part of that form that's required by some parcel organizations, where they actually require you to put a real address down. And in that case, legally, you're supposed to put down like an actual residential address that you have access to. So I can't really comment on that without seeing exactly the context of what address it's looking for. But dig into it and ask them what it's for, what address you need to put down, and I'm sure they can let you know. So yeah, just good luck with that, because I know that the address situation can be really hard. And then the last question from our forum before I move over to the live stream chat. Feel free to start leaving any more of your questions in the live stream. I will be going back in time through the live stream. But the next question is from also a regular, which is Chive2633. They're considering installing Fedora, but they have security concerns, mainly the less robust verified boot and sandboxing of apps, as well as missing exploit mitigations. I have some technical knowledge. I can find my way in basic stuff, but nothing too advanced. As of right now, I don't feel like I possess the knowledge nor the confidence to secure Linux distro the proper way. That's what's holding me back. Would you say these concerns are valid? Does using specifically Fedora without advanced Linux knowledge pose a risk to OS general security? I'm afraid there might be some security issues or challenges that would not be present on an OS like Mac OS. I'm not confident I can manage them properly. So I feel like nothing I say here is going to please everybody. I think that I can acknowledge that there are some limitations in the security of Linux, and I can also say that they are ultra unlikely to impact most people. There are so many people that utilize Linux, and they don't deal with all of the, I guess, reported insecurities that Linux suffers. They don't just wake up one day and are instantly hacked because they're using Linux, which I feel like is how these arguments are presented. They're presented as, if you use Linux, you're horribly insecure and you're a horrible human being, and you might as well just, drink Kool-Aid all day, every day, because that's all you do when you're using Linux. And it's like, well, okay, back up. Clearly, it's not that extreme. A lot of people use Linux, and we see in the real world that it is just fine. Like, I use Linux. Everyone I know, mostly in this space, uses Linux. Fedora especially is very popular here. And so anecdotally, everything is fine. And I think that what's really missing here is that these issues can exist, but people aren't really adding the severity of these issues and how likely they are to impact the end user, which is a totally different discussion. I feel like you can find a nitpicky issue with anything, but if it's only going to impact a few users in very specific situations, then that kind of context needs to be applied to the criticism. So that is my take on a lot of these things. It's not that Linux shouldn't make improvements. It's not that there aren't holes that need to be patched. It's just that people aren't very good at keeping context on these very technical, nitpicky issues that don't actually impact a ton of people. So that's what I have to say about that. With that said, if I was to set up a super high security operating system, I would probably opt for something like Cubes, or I would opt for hardening Linux, or I would opt for something like Mac OS. And of those options, the easiest one is Mac OS. And by default, if you just install Mac OS, set up File Vault and set up your firewall, and maybe you can use something like Objective-C's tools. It's really hard to beat that security. It's really solid security. But again, then you're kind of sacrificing a lot of the benefits that Linux can provide. So it comes down to you. I think that if you're someone who just wants a computer to work, you're fine on Linux. If you're trying to get top-notch security, then and you don't have the technical knowledge, then maybe Linux isn't the best option for you. But I would ask why you need this much security, because I feel like a lot of people read a lot of these takes on missing security features on Linux and whatnot, and the way they perceive it is, well, I might as well just not use it then, instead of realizing just how it's a limitation of Linux and how you shouldn't over rely on security tools in Linux, and kind of keeping some more context on it. That's what I'd say about that. And I know it's hard to like answer it in a way that doesn't piss at least a few people off, but I really feel like there's a lot of missing perspective on a lot of these security issues. And this happens with privacy as well. A lot of times, there's a single data point collected by a single app that might result in just one thing being collected by a few people. And then everyone goes, well, I can't use that anymore, without keeping a little bit of context and perspective on it. So that's what I'd have to say. So I don't think it's going to make or break you with either option you go with. I think it's up to you and what you're trying to prioritize in your operating system. And aside from that, yeah, you'll be fine. Let me put it this way. You're not confident you can manage them properly. As long as you're like safe about what you're doing on your computer, you should be able to have Fedora installed for the next, several years, keep up with security updates, and you shouldn't deal with malware. Statistically speaking, that shouldn't be happening. So, yeah, that's what I would say. And that's it from the forum. I feel so weird without Jonah here. OBS actually opened. Let me see if I can switch to the comments. Whoa, OBS is actually working. So again, just to kind of summarize, normally we do these, we answer forum/Patreon questions first, then we move over to the live stream chat. And so now I'm going to start kind of picking out any questions here that might look good. So go ahead and start leaving your questions. I'm going to go back and see if I missed anything along the way. And I will be doing this for maybe 10, 15 minutes is what I'm thinking. So go ahead and leave your questions and I will go ahead and answer them. Where's the privacy guides guy? Like I said earlier, I shipped him and our other team member far, far away, and there will be content about that soon. Let's see. Stupid. How do I... Erg. Oh, okay, I have to click it on the side, apparently. Do you ever get the problem that after you tell someone about privacy products, they get too paranoid to the point they get trust issues? I mean, I don't think that like this implies that like I tell someone about privacy products and then they get too paranoid. I haven't felt like I've done that, but I do see this a lot in the community, which is people, understand data collection, they understand privacy, they understand security, and then they start distrusting even some of the most trustworthy privacy tools. I don't know if anyone has been following. I kind of hope you haven't been, because it's really silly. But on Twitter, there was a ton of FUD being spread about Signal. And it was mostly from pro-Telegram people, which is one of the funniest places for FUD to be coming from when it's against Signal. A lot of it was just talking about, and even Elon Musk was a part of this, saying that Signal has active vulnerabilities, etc., but they're not actually citing any vulnerabilities. And Meredith had to come forward and go, this is all BS. No one's actually reporting anything to us. As far as we know, everything's safe. And then, she kind of clapped back and said, we actually have default end-to-end encryption, and we actually care about protecting metadata, and it's not just a social media platform and all these things. So I do think that people, for better or for worse, actively seek issues in the tools they use. And sometimes I think they go too far with some of the privacy respecting services that are actually designed to protect them. And a lot of people do look at them and I think nitpick very minor things and make big deals out of them for no great reason. So I'm going to take a water break. There's a lot more talking when Jonah's not here. King of Penguins. Mason asks, are there any YouTubers or channels that you can recommend for people wanting to get into the cybersecurity space? A lot of them nowadays spread misinformation. So I don't know if you're talking about more InfoSec, like the professional cybersecurity space. In that case, I don't have a huge amount of recommendations. If you're talking more about like the privacy/security space, more like the end user stuff, We list resources on our website, and we also subscribe to some channels from our YouTube page that show kind of the people that we, I guess, also, we don't fully agree with everything they do, but like we respect what they're doing, and they have different takes and different perspectives on things that we don't have. And so that's where I would go if you want some of our recommendations for people, because we even actively promote just not getting all your information from us. So we have all these other resources that you can get your information from as well. And we do not align on everything, but I'd say like most stuff, like we have the core values there. What do you think of SimpleX Chat? So I've had very limited experience with SimpleX Chat. For me, SimpleX falls into the bucket of I think it's a great concept. I think it's a great idea. Nothing against their team. But it falls into the bucket of I don't really see why it needs to exist versus improving current solutions. And I think especially now that Signal has usernames, I think SimpleX is a really tough sell for a lot of people, at least for myself. And that's not to say SimpleX doesn't have some benefits over Signal in some situations. I just, for me, question if those niche, more high-level benefits are a reason for me to pretty much have some of my Signal context move to SimpleX. And in general, the answer to that is no, I don't see the use case. But if you like SimpleX, it works for you, if you trust it, then great. The other issue with SimpleX for me is it just hasn't been around as long as I'd like it to, in terms of like understanding its business model, understanding how sustainable it's going to be to keep maintaining endlessly. I know that they have a very pro VC funding kind of approach. They made a whole blog article about why VC funding isn't always bad, which yes, maybe it isn't always bad, but I do always have a little bit of concern when I see privacy services that are looking for VC funding, because a lot of times when you have VC funding, you can kind of give up a lot of control of your product. Not always, but sometimes. And I think that situations like Skiff should make everyone a little bit wary of services that don't have like long-term sustainable business models that haven't been established and haven't existed for a long time. So that's what I have to say about that. Is there any collab you regret doing or went in a way you did not want? I don't regret doing it, but I wish that things with the Hated One, I don't know. I feel like the Hated One and I, we collabed. The collab itself was great, and I think people got a lot of value out of it. So I don't regret doing it. I don't know why us accepting sponsors led to the Hated One making content pretty much trashing our channel ever since then. To the point where actually one of our sponsors, LocalMonero, which is now shut down, unfortunately, the person who ran LocalMonero actually debated the Hated One because the Hated One came after us for being sponsored by LocalMonero. And it was a really silly thing to come after us for. I don't understand why having transparent protocols for sponsors is a bad thing. I actually recently posted on Mastodon. I feel like if you have any single income source, it's always a conflict of interest. So if your only income source is sponsors, now all of your income is dictated by this conflict of interest. But if you don't have any sponsors, you don't have any kind of like reliable, steady income, then I feel like you actually rely more on like clickbait and needing high performing videos and trying to get as much of that as possible. And I feel like that's also a conflict of interest. And I feel like no matter what, if you have one central source of income, it's a conflict of interest. It's good to diversify income so you don't have one person dictating what you can and can't do on your channel. And so, I don't know. I can talk about this for a long time, but I think it was really unfortunate to see someone that you collabed with just kind of like turn around and come after you for no reason. So, yeah. I don't know. I don't regret it, but it was kind of crappy, I think, how that ended up. Let's see. Is there any guide list for privacy in Android and altogether checklist for newbie users? The best thing I can offer that I've seen is we've done an Android privacy and security guide on Techlore. And I think it actually does include a checklist, if I remember correctly. We do want to renovate those coming soon-ish because they're starting to show their age a little bit. But they go through like step 1, step 2, step 3, and here's all the things you need to consider to make Android as private and secure as possible. We actually made those for all devices, so you can look up iOS, you can look up macOS, Linux, etc. We put a lot of time into those, so I really hope that like the Android one is valuable for you. And yeah, that's all I have to say. Have you seen private mode on Android 15? It seems like a light work profile mode. Yes, I have, and it's really exciting. So for those, I think if you use work profiles, it's a little bit questionable where this would come in. I guess I haven't had enough real world experience to understand when I would use a work profile versus private mode. But essentially what it does, you swipe down, you see all your apps on Android. If you have a work profile, you swipe over, and then you have your work profile apps that are compartmentalized from your main apps. Now, this new private mode, you keep scrolling all the way to the bottom, and you can essentially lock away extra apps. So I believe they're tied to your main profile. I don't think they're compartmentalized on a profile basis, but essentially it allows you to hand your phone to someone and they won't have access to certain files and, and certain applications that are locked away behind you needing to type in your phone password. It's a cool feature. It's a little bit on the superficial end in terms of like how much privacy it's actually giving users, but it's still valuable, it's still good, and it actually can be useful in some situations. So I'm a fan. And someone did confirm that the Steam Deck is based on Arch, which is awesome. By the way, let's see. Can I ask what Linux distro you recommend? Want to dual boot my laptop with Linux and Windows? I'm a huge fan of Fedora. I think that it's a good organization overall that's behind it. Like, I like to see like actual full-time employees behind an operating system. And I feel like your options are like Canonical, Red Hat. They're all kind of looking not great right now, but Fedora has a really nice reputation. They do a lot of nice things for security out of the box, and it's just an overall good experience. It's a rolling. They have multiple options for you, and they also support different desktop environments. I like Fedora. Some people might say Arch, but if it's your first time using Linux, I think Fedora is also pretty easy to use. I don't think you can really go wrong. Just try different distros, especially if you're new, and see if there's any one of them that connects with you best. That's probably what I would recommend. Yeah, someone said Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a nice first Linux distro because it's really popular, and so you're going to find a ton of documentation. Pretty much any question you have is probably going to already have been asked by someone. So that is a benefit to Ubuntu. I think Ubuntu, Fedora are all good places to start. Woo. Yeah, I did read this. When I was reading about, when I was first reading about this private mode thing, where it locks away your files and whatever, and your apps, they did say that Samsung's had that feature for a while. So that was a rare situation where Samsung had a nice benefit. Let's see. What do you think of DeleteMe? Or do you have any services that helps you do that? I've been using DeleteMe for a few years now, so I'm a fan of DeleteMe. I think they do good work. I think that you can use any kind of like people searching site to kind of cross-reference anything that you find. So again, it kind of depends. But for me, I like having that safety net. If I miss anything or anything happens, I know that they're going to like help me essentially remove any information. Also, it's more for time and convenience more than anything, because actually opting out of all those services is a pain in the ass. And so when you have a service that does it automatically, it's really nice. So I know that like it's hard to tell which one to go with. I believe JohnnyO goes with a different provider. I use DeleteMe, and it really just varies. But just make sure you're going with a trusted provider because you're giving them a lot of information. I don't actually know about either of these, so I would answer this, but I don't have anything to add. Someone asked, what happened to your Sennheiser 600s? I still have them, but they're on my like workflow desk. I actually stopped using them for recording things. I guess it doesn't matter today because I don't have JohnnyO on, but the other ones are open backs, and so sometimes other people talking would leak into the mic. And also, I don't like the wire, and this just looks cleaner. So these are also Sennheisers. They're the Momentum 4s. So I pretty much started using these for recording. It also means I have one extra port that I can use when I'm live streaming / recording things with people. So I still have the 600s, but I use them pretty much for editing now instead of just casual use, which I think is probably what they're best for anyway. Is the Tor situation Salmonfish talks about true, or is he missing something? So obviously there's going to be limitations in Tor, but there's just not been enough evidence to demonstrate that any single party can actually, on a massive scale, de-anonymize Tor users. So no, there are theoretical attacks. There is some evidence that there are some governments that have some control of servers, but this is something that like we just need to see more evidence for. It's the kind of thing where like it's easy to throw out claims like this and say like, well, this is technically possible and they could be doing this and this is probably what's happening. But there are people whose full-time job it is to protect users on the Tor network, and they still pretty much reassure users that no, it's reasonably safe. These are concerns that they are aware of, that we're aware of. But ultimately, let's say even if it is a concern, what's your alternative? There's no alternative to Tor. Like realistically, like that is kind of the best option that we have right now. And so if it's not good enough, then you're still doing your best. But it does seem to be good enough. And a lot of people behind the Tor project still stand by the Tor project. And a lot of experts still stand by the Tor project. So yeah. That's a good question. So the private space feature on Android 15 I've been talking about, that feature is called, I believe is what they're calling it, is Samsung Secure Folder. Can we have both on Samsung? I don't know. That's a great question though, and I'd like to see what happens with that. My guess is no. My guess is that somehow Samsung is going to remove that feature to keep their current one there. But I don't know. That's a good question though. Yeah, Alexander says Incogni sends your complete data to the data brokers in a deletion mail to say it's okay since the brokers, it is illegal to use this data. What do you think about it? Well, if the data broker has your data and Incogni is sending your data to the data brokers, I don't see what the harm is. Right? What's your opinion on recent Proton news? What Proton news? Is there a way to backup chats and Signal on iOS? I would like to use it instead of WhatsApp with backups. I don't know if there is actually. That's a good question. I'll have to look into that. So I wish I had an answer to that right off the bat. Any thoughts on EOS Fairphone 5? No. When I tried EOS, I wasn't the biggest fan of it personally. And for no other reason other than the usability just didn't speak to me. It felt like iOS, but like the worst parts of iOS. I just wasn't a fan. I know a lot of people really rave about it. A lot of people like it. But more than anything, I just didn't like the usability of EOS. So I don't think that the Fairphone 5 would change a lot of my reservations about it. All right. Any alternative to LocalMonero? Yeah, you're going to be looking right now at like Bisq. Haveno at your own risk is kind of an alternative, but it's pretty fresh and pretty Wild West right now. So as of right now, like your best bet might be to swap. So a lot of people are using something like Cake Wallet to essentially like get their Bitcoin, swap to Monero, and whatnot. So that's an option as well. But yeah, it's not a great situation right now with LocalMonero gone. And I think, I don't know, I'm going to go back to this, but I am in no way blaming anyone else. You know, it sounds like the LocalMonero thing, they even said themselves it's due to internal and external factors. But LocalMonero used to sponsor us here on Techlore, and hopefully we were able to get them some traffic and, you know, help them out as well as they helped us out. Like those are the best sponsorships where it's like very mutually beneficial, and then we can like help our audience and expose them to this really cool service, and the service gets a great audience that gets benefit from the service, like genuine benefit. And LocalMonero is just a great provider. And it's really weird to me how like another content creator who likes Monero, who likes privacy, who likes freedom for their users, is upset about us partnering with such a good organization that no longer exists. So I think that really sucks, and I have a lot of respect for LocalMonero. They did a lot of great work. I have a lot of respect for them actually defending us, essentially, by like debating that creator on a video. But it was really sad for me to see. I wasn't happy about it. And now I'm even sadder because now LocalMonero is no more. So, yeah, a lot of loose thoughts there, but it's too bad. And right now there are a couple alternatives, but I think that, you know, with time we're going to see more alternatives to LocalMonero as the community develops a little bit more. So, and it's about 10:15, so it's been a little over an hour of live streaming. That doesn't make any sense. OBS has been crazy. Because I think I started at 9 and it's 10:15, and OBS says I've only been streaming for an hour and 4 minutes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, this was really silly in my opinion. And for people who didn't hear, Proton was required by law to hand over a user's recovery email, which was an Apple email. So then Apple handed over, because they got the iCloud account, then they were able to ask Apple for the information, and Apple handed over the user's data. Again, this is actually even less, I feel like, bad, in air quotes, bad, than like the situation with the IP address, because again, I don't know what people expect from a private email provider. It's email. Email is inherently not private nor secure, and Proton at this point in time, I have a lot of complaints about Proton, mainly regarding marketing, and not even them advertising themselves as too private or too secure. That's not it anymore. I just don't like their marketing. I think it's way too aggressive. I think that I would wish that they just built their tools better, and that they had like better tools in their suite. But I think for people to go after Proton for privacy and security is a little wild to me, because I think that's probably one of their most reliably strong suits. Ultimately, if you have to use email, what are your options? Just what are your options? What's your alternative to Proton that's better? They offer you end-to-end encryption within the Proton suite as well as outside the Proton suite, and no scandal has in any way jeopardized that. They've also never handed over any data that wasn't something that a user couldn't easily avoid. You know, like an IP address is something that you could have just used a VPN for or Tor for, and also obviously a recovery email. Like, come on. So I just, when I see these issues with Proton, I see that and go, yeah, they're a company that is a legal company. They have to comply with legal requests. And what they're handing over is nothing that they haven't promised they could hand over. So I think that people need to be better educated, and perhaps we as creators need to do a better job of like just reminding people of what a privacy and security email provider can actually provide you. Because it's not providing you perfect anonymity. It's providing you a more secure email experience than Gmail would, than Yahoo would, than all these other providers probably would. And it's still like probably best in its class at what it does. So yeah. That's all I got, I think. I'm getting tired. It's a lot more exhausting doing this alone. But hopefully next month we'll have Jonah back on, and it's going to be a better back and forth. I feel like I'm awkward just talking to myself for over an hour now. But I hope you all still got value out of this. And yeah, I feel just really awkward today too, especially. So that's really all I got, everybody. I really want to thank you all for tuning in. These live streams are really fun, and it's a great way for me to kind of engage with you all and kind of answer more of the real-time questions, any questions you all have had. I want to apologize for some of the lack of content recently for people who haven't heard. If you don't follow us on the forum, which you should be following because then you get these updates, I took a full-time job with Cake Wallet, which I'm a huge fan of. I've been a big fan of Cake Wallet for a long time. So I've been helping them with their marketing as their marketing manager. And so time for Techlore has been really difficult for me to find. So I've been trying to juggle both things. And I've been prioritizing Cake a lot more than Techlore because it's a new job and, you know, I'm having a good time with it too. So yeah, just try to be patient with me as I figure things out. And it's slowly getting better every week. Every week's getting a little bit better. So I really want to thank you all for your patience. I want to thank you all for being here, for asking questions, for being engaged, for being on the forum. And if you like this kind of content, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/techlore. And you can also just join our forum, or you can subscribe to our forum via RSS. Just have some fun. That's all I got, everybody. I'll see you all next month, and peace out.